Cuando el escritor inglés Julian Barnes aparece en los años 80, es inmediatamente considerado una de las nuevas y brillantes estrellas de las letras inglesas modernas. Con su primera novela, Metroland, obtiene el premio Somerset Maugham e inmediatamente con Flaubert's Parrot obtiene por primera vez un escritor inglés el premio Médicis. El año pasado obtuvo el premio Femina igualmente.
My husband wrote a review on your novel Staring at the Sun, and he said Julian Barnes not only stares at the sun, but stares at the intelligence of the readers.
Yes.
Do you do that intentionally?
I remember that phrase extremely well, of course, from your husband's review. Indeed, I circled it with biro and sent it to my publishers and said, put this on the back of the paperback. Well, no, I don't think... The thing is that when you write, it seems to me that you must write at the top of your intelligence. In a way, what happens... I mean, I don't know if this is the case with your husband, but what happens is that a writer gives the best of him or herself to the typewriter, to the reader, and what is left over afterwards is perhaps less interesting. So when you are at the typewriter, you are giving the fullest expression of yourself. And it's a moment which is extraordinarily intimate, the relationship between reader and writer, even though, there's no one there when you're in your study with your typewriter. I'm aware anyway, of a relationship of an intimacy often greater than between lovers. It's a whispering in the air. It's a being inside the skin, inside the skull of the reader. And sometimes you get a response to this, I don't just mean in the form of sort of letters or meeting readers, but a sense of the unseen person out there responding back. I'm not saying that you should imagine a reader, because I don't think you can. I don't think unless you're writing genre fiction, I don't think you can target a particular reader. You just have to write what interests you as well as you can, and then hope that the readers will come to you, or the readers who like that sort of stuff will come to you.
You are not the kind of writer that makes concession to the reader, do you?
Well, it's not your job as a writer to sort of pat the reader on the head and say everything's fine with the world, and I don't think the sort of readers that I have would want that anyway. It's a terrible sin to be patronizing to a reader. I certainly want to involve the reader, and I want the reader to be an active participant in the book. I would hate to have my novels read as passively as television programs are watched.
What kind of literature interests you? What authors do you read?
Obviously, I read the French. I read Flaubert. I read modern French. I like Tournier particularly. I read the Russians a lot: Chekhov, Turgenev, Tolstoy, and then writers like Kundera, Maddox Ford, Graham Greene, and so on. I'd take you around my shelves. I read quite a lot of poetry. Thomas Hardy, as a poet, not as a novelist. A. Housman, Philip Larkin. I'm very attracted to a certain melancholy streak of English poet.
In your book, The History of the World, in 10.5 chapters, there is an obsession of morality that we can also read in your other books. Why that obsession?
I'm a moralist, not in the sense that I believe that the duty of the novelist is to tell people how to live. In fact, I very much don't believe that. The duty of the novelist is to describe how people live. But I'm very interested in moral questions, yes, in how people behave. I mean, not because I want them to follow my instructions, as I say, or because I know the answers, but that's part of exploring the difficulties of being human, is what is right and what is wrong in the modern world. So, yes, I suppose I would call myself a moralist.
It's quite an amusing book. Did you enjoy yourself while writing it?
Oh, I always enjoy writing. I mean, I think there are various categories of writers, and one severe distinction is between those writers who enjoy the process of writing and those who don't. It always surprises me that there are writers. I can think of a contemporary, English contemporary of mine, who always goes around with his novels in plastic bags, and he's always sort of looking at them and saying, I really hate this novel, it's so boring. And I always think, well, why do you write it? You know, there must be a strong element of pleasure in the broadest sense, you know, the pleasure from serious contemplation in what you do. Yes, I enjoy it. I enjoy it very much. I enjoy the first draft. I enjoy the rewriting a lot, because most of writing is rewriting. I don't enjoy the period when I've finally given it to the publisher and I can't take it back, and then there are sort of anxieties after that.
Julian Barnes, the spectrum of contemporary English literature is formed by essential English writers like you, but there is another group of English writers like Kazuo Ishiguro or Salman Rushdie and others. Is there a difference between an essential one like you and the other?
It's curious to be described as an essentially English writer.
Yes,
I think that one of the things that's happened in my generation of English writers is that those who are, as you would say, you know, English are much more aware of what's going on in the world, in the writing world, beyond in what's going on in European, American, Latin American writing, and are influenced and open to influence. And at the same time, there's a generation of writers who, also my generation, who have grown up as part of the sort of British diaspora, whether in India or in Singapore or Hong Kong or even Japan. And so you have writers like Ishiguro, who came to England, I think, when he was 6 or something like that, and has lived here almost all his life, writing in English. And the result of this is that the English novel of my generation has become much more cross-fertilized, more hybrid. You can't so easily say, this is the English novel anymore, which I think is a good thing. I mean, the previous generation, while there were obviously individual great novelists like Graham Greene, William Golding and so on, who were always individual, there was a sort of conformity about it. There was a sort of social realism with a comic twist to it, which is fine, you know. I think now the novel has become more various in England. Though at the same time, when people look at Ishiguro, for example, they say, first of all, they say, isn't it amazing? This man can write English, and yet he's Japanese. Then after they get over that shock, they say, of course, his novels are very Japanese. And then you sort of say, well, what do you mean by Japanese? And they talk in terms of understatement, delicacy, irony, watercolour palette. Now, all those terms can apply to a certain sort of English fiction as well, from sort of Jane Austen onwards. And I don't know if that's the sort of one of the reasons why he's so successful here. But I think there's a very interesting sort of convergence of sensibilities that takes place with writers like Ishiguro and Rushdie.
the situation of English writers in your country? Do they have any voice or any influence in society?
One of the characteristics of the writer in British society is that he or she has very little influence, and to voice a particular opinion about something is usually to ensure that that opinion is marginalized. I mean, one of the, I say this sort of lightly, but it's also a serious business. If we take an issue like the Rushdie affair, now when the fatwa was announced, it is rare in any artistic society for people to agree. However, with about 2 or 3 exceptions, every single writer and artist in Britain thought that this was a disgraceful and shocking act, a deep insult to, not just to writers or the literary community, but to Britain. To have one of your own citizens condemned to death for something which is not a crime in his own country by a foreign government or a foreign church or a church government organization, however you define it, I would have thought that this offered one of the severest insults to a nation's sense of itself and sense of justice that could be offered. And the literary community was, at the beginning, completely solid in Rushdie's support. This made no difference at all to the British government, and you realised at that point the powerlessness, the comparative marginalisation of the writer as he or she is viewed in this country. On the whole, politicians, and it was admittedly a Conservative government, lined up with Dan Quayle, the Pope, the Archbishop of Canterbury, as saying that this book was a severe insult to religion and should be withdrawn. And I'm afraid that all the protestations of writers have not changed the government's point of view one bit. And therefore, what's happening at the moment in the Rushdie case, which is that interest and support among foreign governments is trying to be stirred up, is obviously the way to go. British government's always more interested in trade than principles. Most governments are.
You are a very successful writer in your country, as well as in France, in the United States, in Latin American countries. How do you take success?
I like it. I mean, if you have a choice between being a successful writer and an unsuccessful writer, there's no, you don't toss a coin. I think I was perhaps fortunate in that I didn't publish my first novel till I was 34, and therefore, by the time I was able to live off my writing, I was about 40. So it wasn't as if I was sort of Judy Garland or something like that. It wasn't the sort of young success which turns your head. And I had a long period of knowing what it was like not to be a successful writer. I mean, for many years I had a first novel in a drawer and was living on a hand-to-mouth basis on journalism. I prefer to be successful to be unsuccessful. Any writer would. I prefer to be able to make a living from writing fiction and then do other things if I want to, rather than be forced, as I was for some years, to do journalism in order to support my books. I don't know. I mean, no writer is going to say, I have been completely spoilt by success. I'm a moral wreck as a result of my success. So you probably have to ask other people to get a true answer.
Are you a day writer?
A day writer,
yes,
or a night writer?
Or a night writer.
I'm a morning writer and then an early evening writer. I find that for original first draft fiction, I need the period from about 10 o'clock in the morning to about 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. And then I go into sort of dip when I'm not capable of doing anything except sort of watching television and cooking the dinner, which is a very good thing for, I think novelists should be cooks.
You have no jealousies with other writers?
Yes, but I'm not sure I would confess to it to you. I think I think it's quite good. I mean, all writers, all artists, obviously have jealousies and difficulties and envies. I think one technique is to project them all onto one particular person. Now, this may be very unfair. I connect it to the tradition of the scapegoat. You used to take a goat out into the desert and tether it there and leave it as a sort of sacrifice to, God or the gods, and that this would take all the sin onto it. This tethered goat would take all the sin of the world onto it, and then it would be slaughtered, and your sins would be purged. I think it's quite good as a writer. This is the only piece of advice I would give to a young writer, because I'm not an advice giver, is to choose one person onto whom you put all your sort of envy and jealousy and hatred, which is inevitable that you have. And I used to have one, and every time I saw his photograph, I would say, he's absurdly good looking. It's not fair. Look at his sails. It's disgusting, you see. And in that way, you sort of concentrate it all on one symbolic figure, and you know it's ridiculous at the same time. You know that what you're doing is absurd, but at the same time, it sort of stops you poisoning or your relationships or your readings of other writers.
Besides literature and sports, what other passion do you have in life?
Other passion? Well, I have passion for friendship. I have passion for my wife. I have passion for cooking, travel, France. Quite a few anti-passions. I have an anti-passion for the British royal family, but that's a very large subject. Yes, cooking, as we said, sport, and literature. I think that fills up the time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.